this episode, we turn to a topic that often sounds intimidating at first, but becomes much clearer once you understand what it is really for and why organizations depend on it during stressful moments. Digital forensics is not just something seen in crime dramas or highly specialized government investigations. In normal business settings, it is part of the disciplined work of figuring out what happened during a security incident, what systems or data were affected, and what evidence can be trusted as decisions are made. For someone preparing for the Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, this matters because security leadership is not only about preventing problems. It is also about responding to them in a way that is thoughtful, credible, and useful to the business. When an organization mishandles evidence, it can lose clarity, make poor decisions, damage trust, and weaken its ability to explain events to executives, regulators, customers, or legal stakeholders. When it handles evidence well, even a difficult incident becomes easier to understand, contain, and learn from. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A simple way to think about digital forensics is that it is the careful process of identifying, preserving, collecting, examining, and interpreting digital information that may help explain an incident. The key idea is not merely finding suspicious files or strange activity. The key idea is doing that work in a way that keeps the information reliable enough to support decisions later. That reliability matters because people will often ask hard questions after a serious incident, including what happened, when it started, what was touched, who knew, and how certain the organization is about its conclusions. Digital forensics helps answer those questions with more than guesses or memory. It turns scattered technical clues into a more complete picture of events. For beginners, one of the most important lessons is that forensics is not just about proving wrongdoing. It is also about reducing uncertainty, supporting response actions, and building a defensible understanding of what the organization is dealing with before it commits to major business decisions. This topic matters because organizations rarely get the luxury of perfect information during an incident. Leaders still have to decide whether to shut down systems, notify customers, involve outside counsel, escalate to the board, or activate business continuity measures, often while facts are still emerging. Digital forensics helps them make those decisions on a more informed basis by showing what evidence suggests, what remains unknown, and where the greatest risk appears to be. Without that discipline, teams may overreact and create unnecessary disruption, or underreact and allow a real compromise to keep spreading. A security manager does not need to perform every technical detail personally in order to lead well, but that manager does need to understand why evidence quality and evidence handling shape the success of the entire response. This is one reason CISM places such importance on management judgment. Strong leadership depends on more than speed. It depends on making choices that are grounded in reliable facts rather than pressure, assumptions, or the loudest opinion in the room. It is also helpful to understand the relationship between digital forensics and incident response, because the two are closely connected, but they are not identical. Incident response is focused on managing the event, limiting harm, restoring operations, and coordinating the organizational reaction. Digital forensics supports that work by helping the team understand what is happening, how it happened, and what evidence should be preserved before normal system activity changes or destroys it. Sometimes these goals fit together smoothly, but sometimes there is tension between them. A team may want to quickly restart a system to restore service, while forensic concerns may suggest preserving its condition first so that critical evidence is not lost. That does not mean one side is right and the other is wrong. It means leaders must balance operational needs with investigative needs and understand the trade-offs. Good security management recognizes that a fast recovery is valuable, but a recovery that erases the organization's ability to understand the incident can create larger problems later. Many beginners ask what actually counts as digital evidence, and the answer is broader than most people first expect. Evidence can come from system logs, authentication records, email activity, file metadata, access histories, application records, cloud events, browser traces, backups, screenshots, mobile devices, and many other digital sources. Some evidence directly shows an action, such as a record of an account accessing a sensitive file at a specific time. Other evidence is more indirect and helps build context, such as a pattern of system changes that suggest the event was unfolding earlier than anyone realized. This is important because investigations are rarely solved by one dramatic clue. More often, investigators piece together many smaller facts that become meaningful when viewed together. An unusual login by itself may not prove compromise, but that same login combined with privilege changes, data movement, and suspicious timing may tell a much clearer story. Evidence collection basics begin with understanding that digital evidence is everywhere, but not everything is equally useful, equally reliable, or equally important to the business question at hand. One of the most practical concepts in evidence collection is the difference between volatile and non-volatile information. Volatile evidence is information that can disappear quickly as systems continue running, restart, or change state. Active network connections, running processes, temporary memory contents, and live session details are common examples of information that may not remain available for long. Non-volatile evidence tends to remain stored even after a device is powered down or a session ends, such as files on a drive, archived logs, stored emails, or saved system records. This distinction matters because timing shapes what can still be collected. If responders wait too long or take actions without thinking through the consequences, some of the most valuable clues may be lost before anyone realizes they mattered. For a beginner, the lesson is not to memorize technical categories for their own sake. The lesson is to understand that evidence has a lifespan. An effective response depends partly on recognizing what must be preserved early before routine activity, cleanup efforts, or recovery actions unintentionally erase it. Preservation is one of the core ideas that makes digital forensics different from ordinary troubleshooting. In normal troubleshooting, a technician may focus first on making the problem go away, even if that means changing settings, restarting services, or replacing files quickly. In a forensic context, those same actions can damage the organization's ability to reconstruct what happened. Preservation means maintaining the condition, context, and trustworthiness of evidence as carefully as possible so that later analysis is based on something dependable. This does not require every incident to be treated like a criminal prosecution, but it does require discipline. Teams should think in terms of minimizing unnecessary change, limiting access to sensitive evidence, and creating a clear record of what was observed and when. A useful analogy is a set of footprints in wet ground. If many people walk through the area while trying to investigate, the footprints become far less useful. Digital evidence works in a similar way. Once too many uncontrolled actions occur, the organization may no longer be able to tell what activity came from the incident and what activity came from the response itself. That leads naturally to one of the most important evidence concepts a new learner should know, which is chain of custody. Chain of custody is the record that shows who handled evidence, when they handled it, where it was stored, how it moved from one person or place to another, and what was done to protect it. The reason this matters is simple. If an organization cannot explain how evidence was controlled, people may question whether it was altered, mixed with other information, or mishandled in ways that reduce its credibility. Even when an incident never reaches a courtroom, chain of custody still matters because internal trust is important too. Executives, auditors, legal teams, and external investigators may all want to know whether the evidence behind a major conclusion can be trusted. For beginners, it helps to see chain of custody not as paperwork for its own sake, but as a disciplined way to protect confidence in the facts. Without that confidence, even accurate findings can become harder to defend, explain, or act upon. Documentation is just as important as preservation because evidence has little value if nobody can later understand what was collected, where it came from, and why it mattered. Good forensic documentation captures observations, times, system identities, collection circumstances, transfer details, and decisions that shaped the investigation as it unfolded. This is not glamorous work, but it is some of the most important work in the entire process. During an incident, stress is high, assumptions change quickly, and multiple people may touch the same case over time. Clear documentation creates continuity, so that the next person can understand the current picture instead of starting over or relying on memory. It also helps separate facts from interpretations. A well-documented note about a suspicious account action is more useful than a vague statement that something looked wrong, because later investigators can examine the actual evidence rather than inherit someone else's unsupported conclusion. Strong documentation supports analysis, communication, and accountability, all at the same time. Another basic principle is that evidence collection should be purposeful rather than endless. New learners sometimes imagine that the safest approach is to collect everything from everywhere, just in case it becomes important later. In reality, that approach can create delay, overwhelm investigators, raise storage and privacy concerns, and distract attention from the evidence most likely to answer urgent business questions. Good evidence collection begins with scope and relevance. What systems are likely involved, what data may be at risk, what time period matters, and what sources are most likely to clarify the nature of the incident are the questions that guide a focused collection effort. A small issue involving one user device should not automatically trigger the same collection pattern as a broad suspected compromise of a customer database. Security managers need to understand this because efficient evidence handling is partly a prioritization problem. The organization must gather enough information to understand the event and support decisions, while also avoiding the trap of collecting so much unfocused material that the team loses momentum and clarity. Once evidence has been preserved and collected, analysis begins to turn isolated facts into a coherent explanation. One of the most basic analysis methods is building a timeline, because incidents usually make more sense when events are placed in sequence rather than viewed as disconnected snapshots. A timeline can show when suspicious access began, when key changes occurred, when alerts were generated, and when the organization first became aware of the issue. That sequence helps responders distinguish causes from effects and identify whether the threat appears contained or still active. Correlation is another essential technique, since evidence from one system may only become meaningful when compared with evidence from another. A login record, a file access pattern, and a system change may each seem minor when viewed alone, but together they may reveal how compromise happened and what the intruder was trying to accomplish. Good analysis requires patience and discipline, because the goal is not to force a quick story, but to let the evidence support conclusions step by step. It is also important to recognize how easy it is to make mistakes during forensic work, especially when people are under pressure to produce answers quickly. One common mistake is jumping to conclusions too early and then interpreting every new clue in a way that supports the first theory. Another is assuming that the most visible symptom must be the whole incident, when it may only be one small part of a larger compromise. Teams can also make the error of failing to coordinate with legal, human resources, privacy, or business leadership when the situation affects employees, regulated information, or sensitive organizational decisions. Sometimes people unintentionally damage evidence by taking normal administrative actions before pausing to consider whether those actions will alter the investigative picture. These risks are one reason a disciplined methodology matters so much. Digital forensics is not only about finding artifacts. It is also about controlling human error, limiting bias, and making sure the organization does not create confusion through its own response activities while trying to understand what already went wrong. There is another misconception worth addressing, which is the idea that digital forensics is only useful after a major breach has been confirmed. In reality, forensic thinking is useful much earlier and in many different kinds of events. It can help clarify whether suspicious behavior is malicious, accidental, or simply misunderstood. It can help distinguish a policy violation from a technical failure or a single isolated event from a broader pattern of compromise. It can also support internal investigations that do not look like classic cyber attacks at all, such as misuse of privileged access, inappropriate data handling, or questionable changes made during system administration. From a management perspective, this broader usefulness is important because it means forensic capability strengthens overall incident handling, not just extreme cases. An organization with sound evidence collection habits can answer questions faster, communicate with more confidence, and avoid unnecessary escalation when early concern turns out to be less serious than first feared. That level of clarity is valuable in both high-stakes and lower-stakes situations. The real business value of digital forensics becomes even clearer when you look at how findings are used after the immediate investigation. Evidence can shape containment choices, support eradication efforts, guide recovery plans, and influence who must be notified internally or externally. It can also reveal whether security controls failed, whether policies were ignored, whether third parties contributed to the incident, and whether the organization's assumptions about risk were incomplete. Those lessons matter because the point of incident management is not just ending one problem. It is strengthening the organization so that similar problems are less likely to happen again, or at least less likely to cause the same level of harm. This is why good evidence collection supports leadership far beyond the technical team. It informs strategy, risk management, budgeting, governance discussions, and future training. When leaders understand what the evidence truly showed, they can make better improvement decisions than they could if they relied only on general impressions or incomplete retellings of what happened. By the time you step back from all of this, the central lesson is that digital forensics and evidence collection are really about disciplined understanding. They help the organization preserve facts, reduce confusion, support response decisions, and build a trustworthy account of events in the middle of uncertainty. For a CISM learner, the basics are not about becoming a specialist overnight or memorizing every technical artifact that might appear during an investigation. The basics are about understanding why evidence quality matters, why preservation and documentation matter, why timing matters, and why leadership decisions become stronger when they are based on careful handling of digital facts. Security incidents are stressful, and they often pressure organizations to move fast. The organizations that perform best are not always the ones with the fewest problems. They are often the ones that know how to preserve clarity while responding under pressure. Digital forensics helps create that clarity, and evidence collection is where that discipline begins.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.